Hey, in this video I will introduce you to compliance testing costs, and I will cover a few different types of testing, and also various categories like electronics, food contact materials, and so on, and help you understand what really goes into the testing procedures and the structure, the way that these tests are structured, which will help you to understand how the testing companies calculate the testing cost, and that is also very helpful. It's necessary in order to reduce testing costs. First, we have chemicals and heavy metals testing, and this is also known as substance testing. So when it comes to substance testing, that could be according to REACH, CA Prop 65, CPSIA, and so on. You're charged based on the number of substances, well, the number of substance tests that may apply, and that in turn depends on the materials. Okay, so let's take something like PVC plastics. There are more items on that substance testing list compared to, say, stainless steel. Okay, you're looking at a more extensive number of tests that apply to certain materials, and this also affects the cost. Then by extension, the number of materials and also components that goes into making a product is also something that is a multiplier. So the more different parts you have, say a handbag you can have, or a backpack, right? You have different clasps and linings and whatnot, right? Logo patches and so on, and each material adds to the testing cost bill. Likewise, the number of colors also have an impact. So this gives you an idea. This is a testing quote for a red t-shirt. It's just one single color, so testing cost is fairly low, 320 USD, and this is for REACH in the EU. Sometimes testing companies, they can actually bundle more than one color within one single testing checklist. So it's not necessarily the case that, okay, you got two colors, it will always and by default be twice the price, or even worse if it's four colors and so on. It could be that adding a color would add, say, 20% to the price. Adding two colors might add 30% and so on. But it's very important that when you go to a testing company, request a quote, you need to not just give them a list of materials, but also communicate a number of different colors. Right, so this one is more expensive. The reason is that it's a more complex product. It's not just a red t-shirt, it's a wristwatch. And this customer, they want to test both the metallic watch case and also the leather strap. So as you can see here, it's a more extensive list of tests that are necessary. And some may even overlap. You may need to, for example, do phallet testing on more than one material. Alright, food contact materials. Well, it's almost identical in terms of the cost structure. It depends on the number of substance tests, which in turn depends on the material. It depends on the number of different materials and components. It depends on the number of colors. Now, what is unique is that this applies specifically to the material, the component, or the components are in contact with food or beverage. This tends to be a single material in a single color. You take something like these stainless steel vacuum bottles, for example. Pretty see a lot of those around here in the office, and they have different colors on the outside, different artwork and so on, but on the inside, the actual container, the internal container, which is likely made of like 203 stainless steel or some form of food grade stainless steel, well, it's the same color, okay, and it's the same material for all of them, regardless of the design or and so on. In that case, it doesn't necessarily have to be a situation in which you have to go and test every single color, because on the outside they are different. What matters in when it comes to FCM is really which material, which part is in contact with the food or the beverage. So that's the difference. Right. Toys and children's products. Now it gets a bit more complicated. Now, when it comes to regulations like CPSAA in the US or the Toy Safety Directive in the European Union, they do regulate substances. So everything I just mentioned about the number of components and colors and the types of materials, all of that applies. But also a number of other factors that play into the cost or factor into the cost calculation, and that is physical and mechanical properties. For example, does your product have any buttons or potentially parts it could break off, sharp edges, or sharp parts? Maybe some internal structure, for example, that could break off, and there's something that the child could be injured on. Flammability, is that a risk for your product? Do you need certain labels, okay, that need to be checked by the lab and so on? So there's more than one thing that you have to that has to be taken into consideration. Let's say that when it comes to toys and children's products, it's not just about the substances, but also the characteristics of the product that will factor into the cost. Yeah, this gives you an idea. Mechanical hazards on the top here. Flammability of solids. Yeah. This is just a very basic example. Don't use these price tags as a hard reference. Right, electronics. Likewise, when it comes to electronics, it also really comes down to the characteristics, the functionality. One thing is the power source. Is this powered by an AC adapter? Then you may need to get the AC adapter tested, or you may also need to buy a brand name AC adapters already tested. That's a different term for a charger. If it's battery powered, you may need to get a lithium battery test, for example. Is the product well? Does it have wireless communications, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LTE, 5G, GPS, etc.? If yes, then likely need to get it to get a device tested and certified according to certain FCC rules. So in the EU, there's the RED, the Radio Equipment Directive. And that's really to ensure that devices don't interfere with certain radio frequencies and so on. Is EMC testing required? Depends. For some small battery-powered devices like a quartz watch, not so. But if it's something like a big LED billboard, yeah, that could really have an impact on radio communication and so on in a larger, well, a significant area anyway. So even in this case, there's no way that I can say, okay, this is the price tag for electronics testing. It really depends. Depends on the characteristics. Yeah, and this gives you an idea. This is for a very basic battery-powered device, and it's actually not a complete quote, because then they would also list the test, the battery test, the lithium battery test, according to some IEC standard. But it gives you an idea. So this is a substance test actually, according to ROHS, and then EMC testing down here. Right, how can you reduce testing fees? There are a number of ways to do so. Number one, and perhaps the most obvious, is to limit the number of different materials, colors, and components. Let's say that you're gonna, I don't know, yeah, avoid using different materials for different components when needed. Like if you can use the same steel grade for, say, all the different clasps and buttons and so on, if you may need that, then it's better to do so than to use different ones. Because that way, maybe you can get away with just testing one of them, as they are made using the same material. Likewise, you can also use the same materials and also the colors on more than one product. Um, yeah, to give an idea, you could say, okay, you want to buy, I don't know, bathroom rugs, and instead of having 5 different materials for one different material for each one, you can use the same material, but you cut them into different shapes or something. Something that doesn't really affect the compliance aspect. So that way, okay, you have 5 different rugs in different shapes but the same material. Just to give an idea. If you're buying private label products, you can also avoid customizing the product, because that will, in most cases, render any pre-existing test reports and so on void. Avoid material changes and also functionality changes. Because likewise, you can take a test report from, say, a previous product, a different version of the same product, and okay, I'm going to make a couple of changes, and claim that this still applies. That's not the way it works. That said, it's very rare that you can obtain test reports. This is more likely something that you may want to consider when, well, if you already have existing production lines, and maybe you want to avoid remaking things, if you want to keep testing costs down, if that's possible. Then there's also the number of countries and markets you go into. If you want to launch a product at the same time in the EU and the US, then you're looking at twice the testing costs, roughly, because the EU has its own regulations and testing requirements, whereas the United States also has its own testing requirements. So if you want to limit testing fees, then you should definitely not try to go into more market than one at the same time. Another thing you can do is to obtain test reports from component and material suppliers. This can be very effective in certain industries. It could be, say, a certain type of plastic. If you buy brand name plastics from a certain supplier, like in, say, Japan or Europe or the US, which many times they ship to manufacturing countries like Vietnam or China. They even have offices and warehouses in Asia. So it's very often that, casing is not sourced from some random supplier. You have no idea about the origin, but you can actually instruct your manufacturer to, okay, we want to use this type of plastic, for example. And then you could reach out to that company and say, hey, I want a test report. This is something we often do, just to give you an idea. When we work with customers in the watch industry, I think they never get the movement tested. The reason is that they don't select unknown, say, China OEM brand names from completely unknown suppliers that don't even know what ROHS is, for example. No, the way that's dealt with is to ensure that they, also for quality reasons, only use brand name movements. Could be Miyota from Japan, could be Ronda from Switzerland. Those movements are already ROHS tested. Okay, it's not necessary to test it again. You can obtain test reports from those suppliers. Okay, you can reach out and say, okay, I want an ROHS test report for, say, GL22, which is one of the movements they provide. Likewise, the watch battery, instruct the supplier to only use a certain type of Sony battery. So there's no need to test according to the battery directive in that case, because they can already obtain test reports from Sony. Now, this can only be done when you use brand name components from established companies. You can't go to a random smaller supplier in Shenzhen or Ho Chi Minh or India for that matter and say, hey, I want a test report. That's not the way things work. It only works when you use brand name materials or brand name components. Another typical scenario would be, okay, instead of spending $2,000 on getting an AC adapter tested, you may want to consider a compatible AC adapter from an established brand. Could be Samsung, Sony, and so on. Lithium batteries is the same. And option 6, carefully check your lab test quotation. Don't always take it at face value. The reason is that, without mentioning any company names here, it's not entirely unheard of that testing companies include voluntary and sometimes even unnecessary tests in their quotations. Typical example would be you want to get a lab, you want to arrange testing for a quartz watch. They will quote you $600 for electromagnetic compatibility testing, while the product is even exempt. Do they know this? Is it incompetence? Are they trying to overcharge? That's that's a question for another video, I guess. Right, if you want to learn more about compliance requirements in the US and the EU, you can go to compliancegate.com/tool.